I need to preface this review first by saying that I don't think Guy Ritchie gets enough recognition as much as he used to. And I believe that's because he has the same issues as Zack Snyder, where he takes up big company projects and the big companies ultimately take over in the end and they screw up his films. Well, Guy Ritchie completely succeeds in pseudo independent gangster crime drama genre films, and when he makes those kind of films, he succeeds immensely. I mean, he even surpasses Martin Scorsese in that genre in the sense of at least Guy Ritchie writes and directs every single gangster crime drama that he makes. And not just that, but the writers for Martin Scorsese's films, the writing is inferior because Guy Ritchie, he has a sense of dialogue. He writes such witty lines for characters, and it's not always funny or anything. He writes such vivid, fully realized characters in a genre that's honestly pretty played out at this point, set aside Goodfellas and The Wolf of Wall Street. So whenever Guy Ritchie makes films that are smaller, pseudo-independent, kind of like budgeted by a big company, but they give him all of the filmmaking rights, that's where he succeeds. Sherlock Holmes, I only ever saw the first one, but the first one is one of my favorite films. The Gentleman from last year, I loved that film as a whole. I understand that not everybody would love it just because of the direction, art style, and the storytelling and narrative that it presents itself. But Guy Ritchie is very well known, just like Zack Snyder, in his narrative prowess and how he originates his stories from how he tells the story, how he directs it, how he writes it. So with that being said, I also must say that the trailer for Wrath of Man, I kind of went into this film with low expectations because of the trailer. The trailer made it look like another disappointing, tropey revenge thriller. Well, what I can tell you about Wrath of Man is that it's basically a more ambiguous and more subtle Gentleman. Wrath of Man, it's an astounding film to behold, if anything. The direction and the writing is damn near flawless. There's so much ambiguity, even in the soundtrack. They present you with a story and narrative where there's so much ambiguity, where you're just sitting there watching the film, waiting for pieces and pieces to unravel the full story. And by the end, it does make complete sense. But throughout the film, you're going to be confused, at least until the halfway to the start of the third act. But all in all, though, Wrath of Man is a very complex film that you should watch, and it is a gangster crime drama with a lot of action in it, but there's so much more to it. It's so complex in its narrative, storytelling, the direction, the writing, the dialogue. The dialogue's not as witty as The Gentleman or as Sherlock Holmes, but that's because, like The Gentleman, Wrath of Man is mainly focused on the narrative. And that's fine, because the narrative actually kicks ass. I love the ambiguity behind the story and the characters within the film and within the story. Each one possesses great amounts of depth. They have good sides to them, they have bad sides to them. The main character is technically a very bad crime boss, yet we still are sympathetic for why he's doing what he's doing. And I love everything about how they build up every character, even side characters. They build them up as if they're fully realized, and by the end, you end up caring about everybody that's involved in the film and in the story. And that also has to do with the great performances, not just with the story. The actors and actresses do a damn good job in their roles. The only downside that I can say about Wrath of Man is that there are some story tropes and cliche, mainly, and this is a spoiler warning, minor ones, but mainly the intro setup, which I loved how it was directed, and I loved most of the writing on how it needed to be directed and how it needed to be shot and filmed, but the intro setup, before you figure out all of the pieces and get everything by the end, the intro setup, right when you first watch the intro at the beginning of the film, there are some cliche, tropey parts to it. Like, the intro is basically an armored truck being robbed, and that's fine. But the problem is that the whole time is based around the camera being filmed inside of the armored truck, and you get the dialogue between the two characters. That's great. I always like when Guy Ritchie pulls Guy Ritchie things like that. But then they pull out the guns from outside the truck, and they hold up the truck, they hold up the guys, and how they direct the scene itself is phenomenal. What they do, how they stage it is phenomenal, but how they introduce and set up and go along with the robbery in general is just kind of tropey. And not just that, there are character tropes as well. I hate to say it, mainly just one character, and it's involving one of the main villains. It's typical get rich becomes greedy main bad guy that thinks he can do whatever he wants. He thinks he's the smartest person in the world, so he can take the world by the storm, by the palm of his hands, and because money. And I get that that's realistic to most people in the real world. When they make a lot of money, they form a sense of ego that they didn't used to have or has always been there, and it just kind of increases from the amount of money they acquire. But in a film, in a story, it's still tropey and cliche. No matter how you look at it, no matter how much you try to justify it, it's still a trope. All in all, outside of that, Wrath of Man is pitch perfect. I don't have any other problems with Wrath of Man. It's a very complex, sometimes confusing film that jumps around from character to character, story to story. And honestly, up until the last 20 minutes, I would say there will be at least one part of the main story's puzzle that you will be confused with, and your best bet is to just go along with it as I did, because by the end, it definitely holds up well. The story is completely resolved and it's fulfilled, and I'm very glad how they ended this film, because to me, there were a couple different endings that coincide with each other. It went ending, and then ending, and then ending. And that's not me saying that it was overlong or prolonged or anything. I feel that everything was justified. I feel that the writing and the direction on how Guy Ritchie made this film and its story actually fit in well with its narrative. You could say by the end of Wrath of Man that it went on a bit too long, that's fine. Personally, I think that it was a great take on its art style for the storytelling of it, because honestly, I wasn't really intrigued in the second ending if they were to leave it at just that as the end, because without the third bit of the ending, I don't know, it felt still loose and open-ended. So I'm glad that they had multiple endings by the end of it, because like I said, everything's tied off. So all in all, extremely excellent writing and direction, very great performances. I love the storytelling within the direction. I love how Guy Ritchie filmed and shot this film throughout the entire majority of it. Okay, the soundtrack, the scoring, the art style within the camera techniques, the direction, the filmmaking, everything is just shot and sounds so spectacular. Everything just screams ambiguity, And for a reason, because Wrath of Man's story is extremely ambiguous. And I would highly suggest and recommend watching Wrath of Man at least once, especially if you are a Guy Ritchie film enthusiast. I love Guy Ritchie's films when he's not making big budgeted films. I loved Sherlock Holmes. I didn't get around to watching Snatch or Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. I'm pretty sure it was because when they released, I was too young. I wasn't allowed to watch them. But Sherlock Holmes, The Gentleman, Wrath of Man, I love all three of these films. I heard very mediocre to bad things about Aladdin and definitely about the King of Arthur remake. And that's sad, honestly, because somebody like Guy Ritchie, I do hold him in as high regards as Christopher Nolan, Quentin Tarantino, and I think he's an even better director than even Martin Scorsese in the gangster genre. I just wish that he didn't have the same curse as Zack Snyder when it comes to big companies paying him to make films. Guy Ritchie and Zack Snyder films, I love their films when they have total control of them. But as soon as they're written off and given big budgets by big corporations, that's when their films are pretty crap. So I don't hold Guy Ritchie or Zack Snyder's big budgeted films against them completely, because I know that the big wigs end up having total control. But I'm glad Guy Ritchie is coming out more so into making more pseudo-independent films, and I really hope he sticks to these kind of independent films, because this is where he succeeds and excels in. So overall for me, Wrath of Man is a 9 out of 10. Thank you.